Welcome back to another episode of Digital Voices with Bo Tiffany. We talk about what's on our hearts, what's on our minds, and we talk to interesting people. All of us have a journey, and all of us can take note by what someone else has gone through. There's lessons in life that are taught to us, and the best learners can watch from afar rather than having to experience some of that on their own. Or perhaps there's some tips or advice that you might gain from this as you travel in your own journey to your own destination. So with that said, my guest today is Ruby Peru. Ruby is a ghostwriter. She works on memoirs, but the niche for Ruby is that she tries to incorporate her clients' humor into her writing style, giving the memoir a touch of the person that she's writing about. So with that said, I want to thank Ruby for coming on my show. And how are you today?
Hi, Bo. I'm really well. Thanks so much for having me here.
I'm honored to have you on. I've often wondered, how do I get myself a ghostwriter? Because I have a story that I'd like written. And when I saw your profile, I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity to find out a little bit more about that. How did you get into your field?
Well, I got into this because I was a freelance writer for a long time, and I got jobs through a variety of different sources, but I didn't have a specialty until by a series of weird coincidences, I ended up getting a job writing a memoir for a guy. I lived in a town where there was this spiritual group there that's sort of, some people call it a cult.
Sure.
And he was in this group, and I'm trying to take a really long story and make it short.
It's all right. We got an hour.
As a result of being in this group, which was an India-based spiritual concept, he had gone to India and tried to get an arranged marriage. And as a result, he had ended up in prison in India. And at that point, he actually called me from India and said, I want you to write the story of my life. This was like, he thought he would write a prison memoir, kind of, you know. Mm-hmm. So that's the first memoir that I ended up doing. And it was so significant for me because essentially this guy, he was in the process of getting out of this cult, which is a very difficult process for people. Psychologically, it's a huge transition going from having one extremely strong belief system, which he had been in it for 30 years, and sort of realizing that the thing that drove your whole life you no longer believed to be true. And so he would tell me the story of his life, which is as wacky can be. And I'd be like, okay, I'd write it in just a very matter-of-fact storytelling style. You didn't have to add any embellishments because the story itself was so kooky. And then I would hand it back to him. And he would say things like, wow, I never saw it that way before. And that really freaked me out because I wasn't trying to, I thought I was just telling him the story back to him the way he had told it to me.
Sure.
But by going through me as a writer, I'm seeing it the way a writer sees it. So I'm looking for conflict. I'm looking for characters. I'm looking for moments of transition where you sort of, where the character learns something and grows as a person. Those are the things that a writer looks for. Mm-hmm. So when I'm telling the story, I'm emphasizing those things in order to make it a story that people would want to read. And that was the thing that I was adding to it, that he had never viewed it that way before, because he was so deeply into this philosophy that he viewed everything as a philosophical lesson. Sure. And I wasn't writing it that way. I was writing it as an entertaining story with a lot of depth of character. So that's when I realized that just being a writer, telling somebody's story back to them is a really valuable thing. In a way, it's a type of therapy. Although I'm not a therapist, it is therapeutic for a lot of people just to see their story through the eyes of a writer.
Well, it's from the outside looking in, right? It's really hard.
Yeah.
When we live in our own...
I'm not judging it. I'm not judging the story when I'm writing it. Right. What I'm looking for is how you transformed as a person. And people don't always see their own life that way.
Right. Well, that's part of what I do on my cast is that journey. That's what shapes us and defines us. And I also find that when you are in your own body, we view ourselves differently than how others do. It's the outside looking in, it's hard to identify with. I mean, we're in touch with ourselves, but I think only to a certain degree, because what we think of ourselves might be completely different than how other people view us. And so what you're bringing to the table is kind of that outside perspective, from what I'm hearing, which is great, because it gives us another viewpoint to look at the person that you're writing about in a different light than they would have been able to share themselves had they written it. So I think that's amazing. Let me kind of dig a little bit. Where are you from originally? And when did you start reading/writing?
I'm from all over the country. My family moved every 3 or 4 years of my life. So I'm from lots of places. I'm currently writing a memoir about the time I spent in Tucson, where I lived in junior high, kind of a transitional phase for me. So that's kind of one of the most important places that I've lived. But I mean, I've lived a lot.
Sure.
So I never know how to answer that question.
We have that in common. For me, as a result of moving around, I had like 14 different places that I lived before I was 17. But I dug into books and I read thousands of books. Did that help get you interested into reading and writing those experiences, or was it something else that...
I've always just been a very linguistic person. Okay. I mean, from a very early age, I was always reading 3 grade levels ahead. I was always a reader and a person who was interested in words. Like, even now when I hear people talk, sometimes I see the words in my head, like written, like how would you punctuate that? Like, those are the kinds of thoughts that I have.
So this is just you from an early age, and it's just propelled you, something that, was this a way for you to express yourself originally? Were you more into just kind of finding an alternative world to escape to?
Yeah, I mean, I was a writer as a kid. My parents encouraged me a lot in it. And then I've done a lot of different things for a living, but I was always a writer. And, it started out like a lot of writers where it's like creative expression. And then for me, like, it took me a long time to realize that what I do that's easy for me is hard for a lot of people. That's why people hire me to do it for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't know that for decades. I mean, I thought this was easy for everybody. And then I realized, that I should just do what's easy for me. For a living.
It's that living in your own skin. It's like beautiful people. Everybody thinks they're beautiful, but if you're really good looking, you might not feel the same way about yourself. It's just it's a weird thing. So, parents were really encouraging for this. I always find that story interesting too. Can you tell me a little bit about your family? Do you have a lot of brothers and sisters? And what was it like growing up, moving around a lot?
I have 2 sisters. I'm the middle. What it was like was always being an outsider, and always moving to a place
always the
where,
new guy.
Yeah. And some people get, everybody reacts to that kind of upbringing differently. Some people get really good at making friends. Some people just stop trying, which is a little bit more like me. I was more introverted, so this was not really easy for me moving around, and so I think that I probably developed a lot more of an inner life as a result.
And as a result, that kind of propelled you to express that in some of your writing? Is that the next step of that? Okay.
Yeah, maybe.
So you're doing that for fun. You're doing that just because that was your personality set. Parents encouraged you. When did things start really steering? I know that we talked about that one person that kind of steered you in the professional realm, but high school, college, did you start seeing your talents really take off at that point?
No. Well, okay, I had a great English teacher in high school, and I think most of what I've learned that's useful to me as a writer, I learned actually in high school. And I didn't know he was a great teacher at the time. He was just my teacher. But since then, I've been to college, I've been to graduate school, and I have discovered that what I learned early on was a lot more valuable than anything else. And what I learned there was sentence craft, how to create good sentences, technical facts about how grammar works and how to create sentences with good rhythm and flow. And that's something I've actually been thinking about starting to teach a class on it, because I've noticed that most teachers who are teaching writing are not teaching that, the technique of sentence craft itself. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I would say I learned that in high school, and it's something that I've known for a long time. And then learning how to create plots and make stories, something that I mostly taught myself. I did not find college to be very useful, to be honest.
Any tips for our listeners that may be writers or blooming into writers?
Yeah, I mean, if I have any tips for aspiring writers, and I mean this very sincerely, it's that, like, for instance, if you're a carpenter, you need to learn how to use the tools of your trade, right? Mm-hmm. Hammer, saw, whatever. As a writer, the tools of your trade are words and grammar, punctuation, stuff like that. You need to get good at it. You need to be constantly improving your vocabulary. You need to understand how grammar works. You need to, if you're going to, you need to know the difference between AP style and Chicago manual style. Mm-hmm. You need to know those technical things. A lot of people think writing is all about creativity, and that's one side of it, but it's also a very technical skill. And the better you are at the technical stuff, the better you'll be at the creative stuff.
I think you couldn't have said that better. I went to college and took a lot of English classes, and those AP books are the one that shows all the different styles. It's amazing how many different writing styles and technical aspects go into writing. So for you, that was something.
You can always break the rules, but like they say, if you know the rules, then you can break them. But if you break them without knowing them, then you just look like a fool.
Right. So since college, has this been a mainstream for you? Or what started you in your career, and then what got you into this?
Well, no, I mean, I am interested in a lot of things, and in a way I'm good at a lot of things. So I've tried a lot of things. I was a dance teacher. I was a fitness instructor. I was a craftswoman. I've done so many different things. I just could never decide what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And ultimately I ended up writing because it was just the easiest thing to get work at, Sure. And then I realized, and I didn't really think of it as something I would do for a living because it was easy. I thought that I would have to learn something hard. But for me, ultimately it was like, well, I guess I'll just be a writer since I failed at everything else.
Well, did that help your writing? Having all those prior experiences to draw from? Oh, yeah, definitely. And that was sort of part of if I really think back on it, it was sort of part of the plan was good writers have a lot of life experience. And if you don't, you're really not going to have anything to write about or anything to make metaphors about or anything to compare things to. Right. So in a way, yeah, because, a lot of people that I know end up doing for a living the thing that they were always naturally good at, not necessarily the thing they went to school for. Right. If you went to school for the thing that you were naturally good at, then good for you. That's probably where you're going to end up anyway. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people that I know, you're naturally good at music or writing or math or whatever. And then because you're naturally good at it, it doesn't occur to you that other people are not naturally good at it, that this is a special skill. Right. So you're like, I need to go learn a skill. And then in the end, life takes you back to doing the thing that you were naturally good at all along. Yep. It's funny to me. For me, I find a lot of us look back in 2020 hindsight and we can see certain people, perhaps like the teacher that you had in high school or a mentor or a friend or someone that came into our life at the right time, gave us the nudge that we needed to get our own ball rolling in our adult life and help to shape who we are. Those types of people, I think everyone almost that I've talked to has someone like that. Other than your teacher, anybody else that really inspired you? Sound like your family was really supportive as well. Honestly, no. I really haven't had a lot of... I have sought mentors as a writer. I mean, I have looked for editor. Like I've always had my work. What I discovered
after going to school, college, graduate school, I discovered that the best way to learn to write is to hire a seasoned editor to work on your project one-on-one with you. And once I figured that out, I would hire an editor for each project that I did, and it would help me get better. I mean, it made me get better like so exponentially faster. But essentially, after each project, I would have essentially outgrown that editor. Sure. And the next project, they would give me the exact same advice, which I already knew. So I'd move on to another editor, you know? Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't say that any of those people in particular was like the most inspiring person for me. It was like a series of hiring editors and then outgrowing them and then moving on and seeking new mentors like over and over, you know?
Well, then that's important too, because you were pushed for self-growth. And so you kept looking for that next piece of your learning or of your tool sets, if you will.
Yeah.
That's great. How does someone find an editor when you first start writing and you're getting close to being done with your first book? If you're fresh to this, most of us would even know where to look to talk to an editor or hire an editor. How is that process developed?
Well, there are a lot of websites that specialize in publishing, professionals associated with publishing, like editing and book marketing and illustrating and stuff like that. Do you want me to name a bunch of websites?
Well, no, just I guess that was what I was looking for. So there's websites that we can reach out to as young, inspiring writers, and there's tools that they'll reach back out. You can work with editors. You can find some help that route is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I mean, and there are also a lot of independent people like me that have their own website that do editing, that do ghostwriting and stuff like that. So nowadays, you know, we have the internet. So
well, and that's changed so much. I'm getting old. I'm 46, you know, and what was available 10 years online has grown in proportions beyond my comprehension. There's so much that you can find and get help with. So I think that's great. So
it's hard.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, when you're looking for an editor or a ghostwriter, it is really hard for people to know. If you just Google it, you can find a million, right? Mm-hmm. But how do you pick the one that's right for you?
Right.
And it's a good question to ask, and the answer is, first you should be able to look at work that they've done. So you can see, for instance, if you want to hire a ghostwriter, you should be able to see work that they've done, so you can see if you like their style, and hopefully they've done a variety of things so they can do a variety of styles. The more variety of styles they've done, the more likely they are to be able to do what you want them to do. Mm-hmm. If all their work is in the same vein, sort of looks like the same style, then you better want that style.
Right.
You know? And also, if you're going for a long project, like if you're writing a memoir or something, you want to just start it with a small part of the project just to see if, you know, it's very personal to hire a writer, to hire a ghostwriter. So you want to get along with them and you want to make sure that you feel comfortable telling them about all the things that you want to put in the book, which is often like a lot of really personal things.
Sure.
You know?
Now I see that you have done 15 collaborative novels. Now when you're doing ghostwriting for a person and you have that style that we were just talking about, how is that affected when you have multiple people working on a novel?
So they're not novels, they're memoirs. My specialty is memoir.
Sorry about that.
Okay. They're written like novels. They're written the style is called narrative nonfiction.
Okay.
So it's nonfiction. It's a factual story, mm-hmm. but it's written in a narrative style, meaning a storytelling style, so that it's entertaining to read. It's not just like fact, like a typical biography.
Right.
This is the difference between memoir and biography, by the way. A memoir tends to be narrative nonfiction, where it's written in an entertaining way. And a biography is kind of like a list of things that you did, you know?
Sure.
So anyway.
I'm learning something new, by the way. Thank you.
You're welcome. What was the question?
Just, you know, when you're working collaboratively on a narrative nonfiction and it's more than one person, obviously you get several styles going on. How do you maintain the continuity of style?
Yeah. So here's how, it's not really, I don't think of it as being collaborative because that makes it sound like the client who is not a writer is participating, and they're not really. The way it is I interview them at length, record the interviews, and transcribe all the recordings. So I have hours and hours and hours of information behind the story that they want to tell. And then I arrange it, organize it in order, organize in factual timeline order, and also organize it in terms of the order that I would tell it in the story. And I show them the way that I would organize the story, where we would begin, where we would end, where the transformative parts of the story are, how we're going to keep the suspense up, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So they can see how the technical side of what I do. They don't chime in on this because they don't know how to do this, right? But if there's anything they don't like about it, they'll fix it. And then once we've agreed on that, then I write it. And I write typically 80 pages a month for 3 months. So then you have a story, and what they do is they can make edits to it. Okay. Typically, my clients are not writers. So they'll hire me, I'll write the story, and they will look at it and say, I want to change this, I want to change that, this, that, this, that. And then in the final month, I will make whatever edits they ask for. That enables me to work uninterrupted and to use my knowledge of how a story works to tell their story. And then it enables them to also have input to make sure that the final product is what they want.
Sounds like a great process, and it obviously personalizes it and allows them to be a part of that. It
doesn't work for clients that are micromanagers.
I was just going to say, I could see maybe certain personality personality sets might have a tough time. But so far, it's been pretty.
Me in the middle of the project, that I can't work like that. So
right.
I'll refer them to somebody else.
Understood. Did that develop over time, or has that been a way that you learned going into this?
It's actually the way that I started doing. It's pretty much been doing it the same way the whole time.
Smart lady. How long does it take to get through? You get contacted, and then the process begins. How long before you're actually done with the book on average?
Oh, it's 6 months. It's kind of like I do the same process with every book because it works. It always works the same. It's like we spend a month doing the interviews. Mm-hmm. I spend a month getting the whole outline of the book written, the synopsis, the timeline, getting all the information organized. And then I spend 3 months writing it. And then we spend a month doing the edits, and it's done in 6 months.
Wow.
And now I do book marketing also. So then we can go into, if you want to do indie publishing, we can go into indie publishing, market the book, get it to become an Amazon bestseller, and so on.
So that's a really quick turnaround.
Yeah, it is.
So let me dig into the process a little bit. Let's say I'm interested in having my memoirs done. I reach out to you, schedule an interview. What are the costs, I guess? You don't obviously do this for free, and this is something upfront or on a back end, or is there a little bit of both? Okay.
So I am a reasonably medium to high level ghostwriter. I charge $40,000 to write a book for people.
Okay.
So the people who hire me are not, usually they're people who are, oftentimes they're successful business people, and they want to write a book to improve their, to add to their business offerings.
Sure.
Or sometimes they're just people who have been successful in life and they have the money to put behind this. Or sometimes it's a family that wants to write the story of their family or their parents or something like that, and they pool their money to do it. I do cheaper versions for people who already have a first draft. That can help bring down the cost a lot. But it's like I work so many hours a day on this. You're basically hiring somebody to work full time for you when you hire me to be a ghostwriter. And the way I do it is because it's a 6-month project, I just break it into 6 even payments. And then you pay on the first of each month, and it's like $6,000 and some dollars each month. So that's how it breaks down.
Well, I think that's good information for people that are interested in doing this. I myself have a few older relatives that have wanted to have their memoirs done, and they don't know how to do this. So this is really great information for me to be able to pass along to them.
Great.
I know that you bring the humor, or you try to write in the humor of your client. How hard is it to pick up on who they are? You get that month of interviews. Is that kind of your barometer of who they are? And have they opened up enough to be who they are in front of you, especially if it's an interview kind of situation?
Yeah. Yes. Typically, I mean, if people aren't able to open up to me during those interviews, that would be a real problem. That would make it impossible to write the book. But typically they do. And it's easy to tell. I mean, if the person has an author who they love, whose voice they'd like to emulate, then I just do that. And that makes it easy for me because I can sort of copy the style of another writer.
Sure.
But otherwise, and oftentimes the people who hire me to write books don't read that many books. They just sort of want to be an author and they have the story that they want to tell. So then either I'll suggest some authors to emulate or I'll just create a new style based on their voice. And it's easy enough to tell somebody's voice. Some people are extremely matter of fact in the way that they talk. They're very concise. Or some people tend to be much more emotional in the way that they talk. Some people ramble. Some people, don't ramble. You can tell from the way if you just think of all the people that you can tell they all have different ways of speaking. So when I write the story, I try to make it sound like them, only better. If they ramble too much, I don't ramble too much in the story. I just use this sort of some aspect of their voice that's the fun part. When I say that I include like the person's sense of humor in the story, what that usually means is I use the most fun part of their voice, the most unique part of their voice that makes them them, and that gives the story a flavor. And it's not funny as in haha a joke. It's funny because it's so unique and so specific to them.
Sure. I had this funny thought run through my head, having you do Sylvester Stallone's memoir in his voice.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah, but it's one of those where you're taking an element of the person, and as people read this, they can see or envision that person saying it. That's kind of what I'm getting out of this. Is that correct?
Say that again.
So when the book is done and someone's reading it and they're going through it, they're reading the words, but they can envision, because of the style that you've written it in, that this person is actually saying these things. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the goal for this, right?
Ideally, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And the next point that I wanted to make is you're the only public ghostwriter that writes in this style. Isn't that correct?
That writes in this style?
Yeah. So you are bringing this individual humor or this individual personality into the book that you're writing for your client. Yeah,
that I know of, I am. I mean, I've met a lot of ghostwriters, and usually most ghostwriters focus on writing business books. That's where the money is, and that's where most of the work is. And business books don't have a lot of personality to them. They're nonfiction, they're factual. There's a lot of ghostwriters who just write nonfiction for people. It's reasonably easy to do, and you don't have to have that creative of a voice to do it. And then there are ghostwriters who ghostwrite fiction for people, which is a totally different thing. And then there's me. I write memoirs, which are technically nonfiction, but they're stories. So it's somewhere in the middle.
Sure.
And I'm the only ghostwriter I know of who specializes in memoirs. And as such, creating the client's unique voice is the most important part of that.
Well, I find that would be difficult for most people to do. It takes someone that has, I don't know if empathetic is the right word, but someone sensitive enough to pick up on those idiosyncrasies and what makes that person them. And this sounds like one of your strong suits.
A big part of what I do is kind of like putting myself in the client's shoes. Like a lot of times I'll have a client who I personally don't agree with their philosophy of life or whatever, but my job is to see the world from their perspective, not to overlay my beliefs onto them.
Right.
So I look at their life and say, well, okay, after these experiences of life, this led them to this conclusion, which makes perfect sense when you look at their whole life, And so I really try to see the world through their eyes and, like you said, sort of empathize with how they see the world and try to make the reader see the world the way they do. To me, it's like on a philosophical level, it's like everybody has a right to be understood, you know, and a lot of people have a hard time being understood because they're not writers.
Right.
So that's my job, is to help everybody be understood. Whether or not the reader agrees or disagrees isn't the point. The point is everybody is the way they are for some reason, and it's because of everything that has happened to them in their life so far. So if you put yourself in their shoes, you can see how they turned out that way.
Right. I find that interesting because that's a lot of what I try to do on my podcast.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Those are the stories that have substance to me and that hit home. It's amazing also the rewards that we get out of this. They're not always monetary. The feeling that you're helping, the feeling that you're making a difference, all of those things within your community and within your own circles, those can be just as rewarding. For yourself, what is the biggest surprise that you've carried out of this career that you didn't anticipate?
The biggest surprise in my career?
No. The biggest surprise that's been self-rewarding to you that you got into this.
In terms of the reward.
Yeah. Like I'm sure you thought, well, this is going to be fun. I can make some money and I can work with people. Was there something else that popped out that you just didn't realize how great this was going to be for you?
It's incredibly educational to learn about different people's lives. And the most delightfully surprising thing is a lot of people who are totally different from me in every way have trusted me to write their stories. I've written stories for, I wrote a story for a man who grew up in a nomadic tribe in Africa.
Oh, wow.
He trusted me to write his story and he loved it.
Oh, that's great.
You know, and it sets me apart from a lot of, there's a kind of belief in the world of the arts that men can't understand what it's like to be a woman, and a white person can't understand what it's like to be a black person, and this kind of person can't ever understand what it's like to be another person. And people are offended when you act like you understand the other kind of person. And I take exception to that belief to a great degree because it is my job to understand what it's like to be other people. And I believe that anybody can understand what it's like to be another person because ultimately we all experience the same emotions.
Right.
There's only so many emotions available to the human brain.
Right.
And no matter what is causing you to feel it, you know, those same feelings exist in every person. So, you know,
stripping it down to the basics and getting rid of like the cultural and the social inputs and just kind of finding out who at the root that person is what kind of helps. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, like when I wrote a story for this African guy, it's like, okay, so his life was living as a refugee in the middle of a war and running from people who were like trying to gun down his village from a helicopter, like stuff that is so far from my realm of experience. You couldn't pick anything further. But I know what fear is, you know, and I know what anger is, and I know what unfairness is.
Right.
And he was very happy with my ability to understand what he went through and this is what actors do as well. You know, as an actor, you have to put yourself in the position of other people who are not like you. But ultimately, you just think, what have I experienced that's like this? And you find something.
How long have you been writing for now on a professional level?
Sorry, my connection is not that good.
Oh, I apologize. How many years have you been ghostwriting?
Oh, probably 16 now. I keep saying 15, but I've been saying that for a year. So about 16 years. It's been a while.
And you've done 15
books.
Oh, now 20? I'm sorry, I'm on your website.
I think, I mean, when I include my novel and all the books that I've ghostwritten and the ones that I'm working on now, that's 20 books.
That's a great portfolio. Which one
sticks
out the most?
Sort of added up. Which one sticks out the most?
Yeah, the gentleman that you were just explaining about, or is there other one that really touched you?
Oh my God, so many. The first one I wrote was so deep. The one about the guy in the cult. And then I wrote one called Business Cards and Shoe Leather for a client named Larry Vaughn. He gave me a byline on that book, so that's the only book that I've ghostwritten that I have some credit on. Mm-hmm. And that was a really interesting one because it's about, it's one of the more subtle stories, but it was really interesting on a deep level where it's about a guy who's dyslexic, but he's in his 70s now. So he grew up a long time ago in a small town where nobody knew anything about dyslexia. And it was clear that he was smart, but he couldn't read. And so nobody knew what to do with him. And he just found his own way in life, like you do, mm-hmm. without ever knowing how to read or write. And he became a very successful businessman. And he was keeping this dark secret of not being able to read and write, which of course most people in society, everybody expects you to read and write. And eventually he came clean. Even his wife didn't know. He was that good at hiding, mm-hmm. you know. And eventually he realized he needed to learn. And by the time he realized that, he was 50, so the technology existed. And he learned what dyslexia was, which he had never known before. And he learned about how to learn to read if you're dyslexic and how to use technology to help you and stuff. And he managed to overcome that. And I thought it was a really beautiful story because of how it's just a great story of resilience and dealing with a certain shame and not realizing that this is something people know about. But of course, when he was a kid, people didn't know about it. Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting story. I've written so many interesting stories about people that are just like,
it's been
dealing with some aspect of.
So it sounds like it's been enriching for you.
Yeah, like dealing with some aspect of their selves that makes them feel like they're different or an outsider, and then somehow coming to terms with it. That's what a lot of memoir is about, you know.
So currently, I'm looking at your website, and it's talking about TED Talks, and it's talking about how you're helping visionaries express their ideas in the public. How is that something that's new that you're currently working on? What are you doing in that realm?
Yeah, it's a new thing for me. Well, I helped one client with a TED Talk that he was doing, and it was super fun and exciting for me. And I think scientists are another type of artist. Mm-hmm. And I find it really interesting to help scientists who are also often people who don't know how to express themselves verbally, you know. Mm-hmm. They need me and I need them. And it's another way for me to learn something new and interesting while helping people express themselves, you know.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I'm actually a big fan of TED Talks. I watch them all the time. I just love to learn. And I have a feeling, too, that I'm going to start reading some of your books because I think what you're bringing out from these are interesting. You kind of got me hooked on the gentleman from Africa. I think that would be a really good.
Oh, his book. Okay, his book. I didn't end. Okay, his book. I wrote part of it and didn't. It became a long process because his name is Gary Duaney and his book is called Walk Toward the Rising Sun. And at the end of the day, it's not actually written by me. I wrote part of it, and then when you work with a publisher, they do all kinds of things, make you rewrite, and they'll hire an editor who will rewrite you and stuff like that. So he went through that editorial process, and it sort of got out of my hands.
Understood.
But it's called Walk Toward the Rising Sun, and it recently came out. So yeah, you should definitely take a look at it.
When the editor gets involved, is that difficult for you? Does it change the book a lot, or how does that process work?
Yeah, it's really difficult.
Too many hands in the pot, or just two different visions?
Yeah. How do I talk about that? It's really the easiest thing for me is if somebody gets if a client of mine gets a contract with a legit commercial publisher, a lot of people decide to indie publish, and that enables me to take them all the way through. But I would never discourage anybody from going with a commercial publisher because there's so much status in it. And if they do, those publishers tend to assign their own editor to it. And if I try to work with that editor, they often want to make changes that I really don't agree with. And it's better for me to just say, you do it. I don't want anything else to
Right,
do.
right.
You know?
At the end of the day, who has creative say-so within the novel when it comes to that? Is it the editor? Is it?
Well, at the end of the day, whoever's publishing gets to do whatever they want with it.
Gotcha. Okay.
You know?
That's
why a lot of people...
Well, and so indie...
That's why a lot of people do indie publishing these days.
And indie, just for our listeners, independent publishers, correct?
Yeah.
And is there obviously working with a smaller publisher has its advantages and disadvantages, just like working with a larger publisher. Can you shed some insights on the benefit of coming to an indie publisher versus the mainstream?
Yeah. Well, this is something a lot of people don't know about that. It's very confusing for a lot of people, so I'm going to try to make it quick and easy. But like, you have your big commercial publishers, and then you have independent publishers who are small publishers, and then you have just publishing it yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Whenever you work with a publisher, they're going to take a percentage of the work, right? But they're not necessarily going to contribute a percentage of the profits, but they're not necessarily going to contribute to the money that you put into marketing the book. And nowadays, with print-on-demand publishing, it's easy to publish a book. It's not easy to publish a good book unless you're an editor, because you really have to do a lot of work to get it to the state where it's like a professional, proper book with an excellent book cover and great text and everything's perfect and the marketing copy's perfect and everything like that, right? But so if you go with a publisher, they're going to take a percentage of the work of the profit, but they're not going to contribute to the marketing in most cases. And the book won't sell anything unless you do a lot of advertising, which you will have to pay for yourself. So that's why a lot of people just publish it themselves, or they hire someone like me who knows how to do publishing and editorial and marketing to get it off to a really good start. And then you can just do Facebook ads or whatever type of advertising you want to get the book to have some traction. And at the end of the day, a lot of times people make more money that way by front-loading a bunch of money into hiring somebody and then getting 100% of the profits for themselves in the long run.
Earlier, I believe you were telling me that you teach a little bit too. Is that correct?
I don't right now. I have off and on taught writing and comedic writing and improv and a lot of things along those lines. I'm thinking about putting together a class on just sentence craft, like I was saying, but I actually haven't put that together yet because I'm working on about 3 different projects right now.
The improv, I didn't get to touch on that. That was your roots, if I'm not mistaken. How did you get involved with that niche in writing?
Well, improv is a theater art, not a writing art, but it's great for.
So it's completely improv. There's no rehearsal or any ideas ahead of time.
Right. You rehearse the process of improvising, but you don't rehearse the actual story that you're going to end up telling.
Sure.
So, I started it in college at Carnegie Mellon, and then I just did it with independent improv groups here and there over the rest of my life, over the next 20 years or whatever. So, and it's great for stimulating creativity for anybody who's a writer, because you're given a situation, and then there are certain rules that you need to follow that will help the story work. They're not arbitrary. They're the kinds of things that you learn in order to make a story work when you're working with someone else. As a writer, you're not working with someone else. You're just sitting and writing on your own. So when you're doing improv, you have to work with somebody, and that's a very different process. But it also forces you to let go control. Most people who try improv and aren't good at it because they can't let go control and understand that the other people on stage have just as much of a contribution as they do.
Gotcha.
You have to accept that the story has a life of its own and it's going to go wherever all these people take it.
Mm-hmm.
What most people try to do is control the story, and that ruins the story. So that process of learning how to let the story have a life of its own is great for any creative person.
Well, it sounds like what you learned there with letting that story tell itself without influencing it is what you carried into what you've done with your memoirs, correct? That must have been an important...
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I mean,
as
the writer, I get to control a lot of it.
Yeah.
But the story exists. The story is the person's life.
Right.
So they get to... It exists all by itself. And I get to look at it and go, okay, well, how am I going to tell it? That's the only thing I get to decide.
But
which aspect of it?
I feel like that early work experience helped give you some tools that then helped you with what you're doing now in keeping their story theirs, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean,
when you're a writer, practically everything you do feeds into writing. Yeah, that is true. And also, I have a fiction book out right now called Bits of String Too Small to Save. And writing fiction is so different from what I do as a ghostwriter. Mm-hmm. But it's always helpful because doing anything like that just like really stimulates your creativity and makes you release control and just sort of accept whatever thoughts come, that's what comes. And I guess the story is not going in the direction that I originally thought, and that's okay. And that's something that you have to oftentimes be okay with as a writer.
Right. Let's plug that a little bit. So Bits of String Too Small to Save is your new novel. This one is a fiction work. Can you give us a little insight of what it's about?
Yeah, well, the book is, it's sort of a magical realist story that starts out feeling like very Alice in Wonderland type thing, only in a completely different type of dystopia.
Sure.
Where this little girl falls through like a rabbit hole type of thing into it's like a portal into another world. And in this other world, she has to go on this great adventure. And it's an exploration of a couple of things. One is the concept of home. What is home? It all starts because people are threatening to put her grandmother in a home. And what we know what people mean by that. Not actually a home, but an institution, right? Mm-hmm. And so in that case, the term home is a euphemism for something that is not at all a home. And so they go on, she and her grandmother go on this vast adventure trying to find a new home in this alternate world, right? And there's a lot of exploration of how do they make it a home? What is home? And stuff like that. So that's sort of part of what it is thematically. But the story, a lot of what happens in this alternate universe is they had what they called a blight, which is essentially a pandemic. I wrote this long before the pandemic, so
ironic.
It's just a coincidence. Yeah. But their blight caused so many problems that they used technology to solve some of those problems. The original problem was that mothers were allergic to their babies. So they used technology to develop monkeys that could raise human babies. It's a really wacky story, as you can see. And so the monkeys became kind of humanoid, and they raised the babies because people were allergic to their own babies. But then that solution caused another problem, which was that when monkeys die in the forest, other animals eat them. And when the other animals eat them, these monkeys have so many chemicals and technological things in them that it causes a different disease. And this disease is where animals turn into people sporadically, and people turn into animals. So that's the second problem. And there's a lot of talking animals in this book. I love talking animals. It's like a theme with my work.
Well, it sounds refreshing considering what you normally work on, just to be able to be writing about anything and fun stuff is. This book is a total departure from stuff that I do for a living. So you mentioned, obviously there's some home components in that novel, which is going to lead me into my last topic with you. When you're not writing, you've been restoring or rejuvenating a 100-year-old home in Maine by yourself, which I find fascinating. Tell me about that. When you're not writing, is this basically what you've been spending most of your time on lately? That's a heck of an endeavor.
That is what I spend 100% of my time on. Okay, I did another podcast with this guy that was all about people and their crazy inventions, and I was like, oh, I'm perfect for that. I've always been interested in like inventions, building things, architecture, and especially sort of like tiny homes and like tearing things apart and putting them back together in a million different ways.
Sure.
You know, this is when I was telling you about how I wasn't automatically a writer is because I have a lot of other interests as well.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of my interests. And so before I bought this house, I was building all these weird contraptions. One of them was a bed that goes up to the ceiling on pulleys. And I did it really successfully and it worked out great. And it just made me want to build more stuff. I was actually building that in a house that I rented. And my landlady was so nice to let me do that because I really made changes to the house. And I realized I need to own a home. And as soon as I get it, I know I'm going to make a mess out of it because I'm going to want to take everything apart and put it back together again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. So I bought this house that I have now. And it's a 100-year-old house, but that makes it sound like it's sort of grand. And it's not at all.
Mm.
And so immediately I just started thinking like, I hate these walls. And I tore out all the interior walls. So that the main floor is just an open kitchen living space. And I tore out the closet under the stairs, and I'm building a desk into the under the stairs area. And I'm making it look. My idea with it is like I don't want to take an old house and make it new. Mm-hmm. I want to take an old house and make it look older in a cool way. So I've gotten like I bought all these antique tin ceiling tiles that were taken out of an old theater.
Sure. And
I'm installing those in the ceiling. So the ceiling looks like an old antique ceiling.
Oh, how fun.
And the floor is like old antique boards. Originally, this house is just trashy. I think it had been a rental house for the entire 100 years that it was alive. There's nothing majestic about it at all.
Sure.
And I'm trying to make it look like it used to be an old, majestic home, and I've restored its ancient glory, which is not true, but hopefully I will create that illusion.
Well, you're making it yours. I guess my question is, did you put the elevating bed in your new home?
No, that was like permanently installed in the other house. But I could build one, but except I can't in this house because it has low ceiling. And the other house required a high ceiling.
Bummer. So, that sounds like a fascinating contraption. I think that would be fun.
I do still have all the pulleys and things. I could rebuild it next time when I get a high ceiling house. I probably will.
And how's the pandemic affected you? Have you been just as busy because of the way you work?
Well, I've always worked from home, so that didn't change, but it has definitely affected the economy of, like, what I do as a ghostwriter. It's kind of a luxury service for people, you know. Mm-hmm. Nobody needs to have their memoir written or else they'll die, you know.
Right.
So what has happened is for a while, all the work dried up, and it was terrible. And then all the work came back in like a flood of work. All of a sudden, everybody realized this was a great time for them to finish that novel or that memoir that they had started, mm-hmm. you know. But people have less money. So in a way, there's more work, but there's less money. So I've developed a bunch of techniques to help people where it takes less effort for me and it's more affordable for them.
Sure.
For instance, I help people. A lot of times when people remember their life story, they remember it as short stories. Mm-hmm. So I offer to write it as a series of short stories. That way they don't have to pay for a big memoir project all at once. Mm-hmm. They can just pay me to write certain short stories and like really develop those stories and make them kind of go together, and they can start to see the book emerging story by story as they can afford to have me do it. Mm-hmm. You know, so that's one of the big things that has changed.
What's in your future? What is Ruby Peru going to be focused on for 2020?
Oh, I'll tell you. You would never predict this either.
Well, I'm excited.
Okay. My book, Bits of String, as I've mentioned, it's a pretty wacky story with talking animals and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And it's gotten to be an Amazon bestseller. It's been a bestseller since October, and it's been pretty successful. And so I'm doing an audio book of it, and I have this brilliant actress who is going to do the audio, and it's going to be like a dramatic reading, not like an ordinary audiobook. It's going to have what they call Foley, which is like the sounds in the background, like on a radio play, sure. Like a squeaky door and popping horses' hooves and stuff like that. And so that's a project I'm working on now. And also for the like future, I've decided like my career has two sides: one, memoir and ghostwriting, and two, wacky talking animals type stories.
Okay.
On the side of wacky talking animals type stories, I really want to get into cartoons, like big time cartoons. I think cartoons are modern cartoons are so funny and so well written, and they have those amazing voiceovers.
Mm-hmm.
I just love them, and they're so you can be so creative with a cartoon. I mean, you can do anything. So it opens up all the possibilities, which is exactly the type of magical realist type story that I like to write. It took me a long time to figure out that cartoons was really the right way for me to go with ambitiously in terms of like the next step with that side of my work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of the direction that I'm thinking about going. By next year, I'll probably have like a.
I feel that that's life kicking you a little bit back onto your path. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have a big belief in that. So laugh at me if you will. But seems.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Life is kind of pushing you in the direction that you. I mean, we all pursue our dreams, but life sometimes has an ulterior plan or one that wasn't quite what you envisioned, and that's kind of what I heard coming out there.
Yeah, that's true.
Ruby,
it's sort of like you go, wait, I never expected that.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Anything that I haven't talked about that we'd like to bring up, and any other plugs that I can do before I let you go? I'll be putting links into the description for this podcast to find you. If you're looking for a ghostwriter, if you're looking for some help developing some of these ideas, I think Ruby.
My website is rubyperu.com. Ruby like the gem, Peru like the country. And I, especially since the pandemic started and since the kind of economy has changed, I do a lot more editorial stuff for people. A lot of people have first drafts that I can help them take and help them develop it into a final draft. What I found is I've met a lot of people that wrote a first draft and they just got tired and exhausted and realized that writing is a lot harder than they thought. Mm-hmm. And they just want to hand it over to somebody and say, please finish this with all the skill that you have. And so I've been doing that a lot for people. So there's a lot of different levels of editorial work that I can do for people. And so you can find me on my website, and my book is out there. And I think that's pretty much it.
Sounds great. I'm also going to put a link of your work as well, especially to the book. Now, Bits of Strings Too Small to Save, that's out currently?
Oh, yeah. Okay. You can get it anywhere where you buy books online.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the description for that as well. So it has been a pleasure. Insightful. You're just a great person. So I really appreciate the time that you spent with me today. And I hope that this was a great experience for you. And I hope our listeners have picked up some tools if they're trying to learn more about this, maybe how to get into this field, or just want to know about it. We always hear about authors. We don't really know about the process. And so this behind the scenes look of this, I found really interesting. And I appreciate your time for that.
Well, I think I really like the concept of your podcast. So thanks for doing it.
I appreciate it.
It's been really insightful questions.
Well, thank you once again. You know, I like to reach out. Usually I'm in my second season. Maybe in a year or two, if you don't mind, I'll reach out and we'll see what you're doing at that time.
Oh, yeah, sure. Anytime.
All right. You have yourself a great day.
You too.
All right. Bye now.